Hello and welcome to Drama Recaps. Today, I'll break down a 2018 sci-fi drama film titled, I Think We're Alone Now. Spoilers ahead. In a quaint town, our protagonist Del takes on the rather unsettling task of raiding homes for batteries. Following each visit, he leaves the place spotless and removes the photographs of the inhabitants. Once finished, he sprays a sign on the street outside, a visual indication that he's done with this home. This ritual is repeated throughout the street, house after house. Subsequently, Del finds himself in a local library, marking off the locations of his visits on a map while enjoying a coffee break. His routine is broken when, on the following day, he stumbles upon two corpses in a house. In a seemingly practiced routine, he wraps them in a sheet, cleans up the scene, and takes another photograph. He then transports the bodies to a deserted field, digging graves for their final resting place. Returning to his daily life, Del enjoys some fishing and then retreats to the library. Following dinner, he spends the evening immersed in an old movie on his laptop. His peaceful solitude is shattered by a late-night explosion, which turns out to be fireworks lighting up the distant sky. The following morning, Del's attention is caught by the sound of a car alarm. Upon inspection, he finds an unconscious woman in the car with a gun in the back seat. As the woman regains consciousness, she finds herself locked in a room, with a bandage wrapped around her head. In response to her calls, Del questions whether anyone else was with her and why she's still alive. She throws the question right back at him. Upon learning about the gun, she mentions that it was a protective measure against the possible reanimation of the dead. Pleading for the door to be opened, she complies with Del's condition of counting backward from 100. Once the door is opened, she halts her countdown and steps outside, questioning the lack of the putrid scent of decay. Del offers her the car keys, implying she should leave town. However, she expresses her desire to stay and help Del with his grim work. Del, seemingly indifferent to her worries about human extinction, wishes her luck and continues on his way. The woman, however, remains undeterred, watching Del from a distance and later offering to assist him in his macabre mission of clearing the town of its deceased residents. Over a meal, Grace probes Del for his thoughts on the sudden mass demise. Del, uninterested in the cause, dismisses her inquiry. Upon further conversation, Del admits that he experienced more loneliness when the town was still populated. This revelation makes it clear to Grace that Del prefers solitude, prompting her decision to depart. As she approaches her car, Del taps on her window, querying her destination. Grace reveals her intention to visit Niagara Falls and all other landmarks. Del, questioning his own need for companionship, proposes she stay for a trial period. Grace agrees and formally introduces herself. The following day, Grace settles into the same house where Del initially took her after her accident. One day, as Del drives around, he spots Grace heading to an uncleaned part of the town. As Grace readies to remove a body from a house, Del insists on his specific cleanup routine. Grace requests guidance, and Del advises her to prioritize scavenging for batteries. Confused by Del's meticulousness in cleaning a refrigerator in an uninhabited house, Grace learns about Del's theory of reducing chaos, a concept he relates to entropy. Later, as Del searches for the book War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy, he mentions to Grace about the overdue fines owed by a resident named Mrs. Young. Discovering the book, Del expresses disappointment at the leather binding's condition. While Del busies himself with cleaning outside, Grace notices an empty picture frame. As they prepare to bury Mrs. Young, Grace asks Del if he plans to say any words over the grave. Del retorts that Grace hadn't uttered anything for every deceased individual she came across. Grace reveals her practice of holding her breath for 10 seconds upon seeing a corpse. Del agrees to follow this ritual for Mrs. Young. In search of Del at the library, Grace wanders into his room. She discovers a family photograph and an array of photos showcasing the town's past inhabitants in a drawer. Grace stumbles upon a small dog in a deserted house and decides to adopt it, despite Del's allergies. As Del declines to help name it, she simply refers to it as dog. During a meal, Grace recounts her 2-year-long pet goldfish experience, assuming it was an impressive lifespan. Dell corrects her, stating that goldfish can live up to 25 years, a fact that Grace refuses to accept. One morning, Grace briefly contemplates the scar on her neck before joining Dell at the library. While Dell busies himself with organizing books, Grace is distressed to find the dog gnawing on a magazine. Dell tries to take the dog outside so Grace can clean, but ends up being bitten. Later, Grace aids Dell by stitching up his dog bite. However, the next day brings more turmoil when Grace wakes Dell with the news of the dog's disappearance. Dell admits to letting it out for a bathroom break. Grace's anger at this news prompts Dell to assure her that he'll find the dog. Upon returning to the library, Grace confronts Dell in his room, scattering his collection of photos on the table. She criticizes Dell's treatment of the people in the pictures, reducing them to mere objects. Grace then shares her personal experiences, detailing her parents' unusual death circumstances and the fact that she was with a boyfriend when the mass death occurred. Unlike Dell, Grace had people who cared about her, leaving her feeling less alone. She finishes her tirade by throwing the photos at Dell. The following day, Dell leads Grace to a greenhouse, showing her the remaining homes to be cleared. He requests her help but reassures her that it isn't a duty. Riding her bike, Grace stumbles upon a house not marked on their map, prompting her to call Dell on the radio. Arriving at the scene, Dell is agitated as Grace has unknowingly found his home. Initially resistant to Grace's offer to help him clean, Dell eventually acquiesces. Following a respectful moment of silence after burying the body found in his home, Grace attempts to discuss her past with Dell while in the car. Instead of a verbal confession, she impulsively kisses him. The next day brings another surprise when Dell awakens in Grace's room to the sound of unfamiliar laughter. Gripping Grace's gun, he descends the stairs to find a man and woman sitting with Grace. The man introduces himself as Patrick and the woman as his wife, Violet. When Patrick refers to Grace as his daughter, Dell's confusion is apparent. This leads to Grace's confession that Patrick and Violet are her parents. As Patrick chatters about his golfing companions, it dawns on him that Dell is unaware of other survivors. Patrick scolds Grace for not informing Dell that there are thousands of other survivors. Once Patrick steps out, Grace confides in Dell that Patrick and Violet are not actually her parents. She explains that they were paired together when she arrived in California. Grace's revelation angers Dell, who is upset about being misled regarding their solitude. She pleads with Dell not to leave her, clutching the steering wheel of his car in desperation, but Dell forcibly removes her hand and drives away. As Grace begins to pack, Violet pleads with her to return with them, assuring her that they need to strive to become a real family. She emphasizes that Grace cannot handle the situation alone. Patrick later visits Dell at the library seeking audiobooks, but Dell dismisses him. Patrick expresses his admiration for Dell's intelligence and suggests that their California community, equipped with doctors pioneering the human brain's capabilities, could benefit from someone like Delaware. Despite Dell's indifference, Patrick leaves his address, penned in a book, in case Dell changes his mind. Once Patrick departs, Dell shelves the book. When it's time to leave for California, Grace gazes mournfully at the library as they drive away. After a few days, Dell's loneliness compels him to visit his old house, expressing his frustration by hurling rocks at it. Back at the library, he turns on the CB radio, hoping to hear Grace's voice. One day, Dell browses his photo collection, recalling what he knows about each person. The weight of his solitude ultimately leads him to retrieve the book containing Patrick's address. He finds the address and begins his journey to California. Along the way, he encounters a bridge blocked by cars filled with deceased passengers. He gathers his supplies and finds another vehicle to continue his journey. Upon nearing his destination, Dell is captivated by the sight of illuminated houses in the distance. Arriving at Patrick's house, Dell observes Patrick and Violet through a glass door. When Violet senses a presence outside, Dell quickly conceals himself. After she finds no one, she tells Patrick she will go check on Grace, to which Patrick requests her to also inspect the sensor on her head that frequently loosens. Dell waits in his car until Patrick and Violet retire for the night. As soon as the lights go out, Dell, armed with his gun, breaks into the house. Inside Grace's room, he finds her asleep, hooked up to an ECG monitor. Del awakens Grace, noticing the stitches on her nape. He apologizes for allowing Patrick to take her. As they attempt to leave, Patrick spots them, insisting Grace should be back in bed. Del demands to know what Patrick has been doing to her, prompting Patrick to admit they're erasing her negative emotions. Patrick justifies their actions by stating they're removing emotions like anger, sadness, and guilt because it's unfair for people to remember the horrific past. Mid-explanation, Grace suddenly shoots Patrick. Violet appears, viewing Patrick's body devoid of any apparent grief. She mentions that she once had a daughter and coldly instructs them to use the Windex under the sink for cleanup before she leaves the room. The next morning, Grace emerges from the house carrying her goldfish. As they drive away, Del takes in the sight of the town's cheerful residents beginning their day. Grace expresses regret for shooting Patrick, but when Del questions whether she truly feels remorse, she retracts her apology. Grace inquires whether it's okay not to feel bad about the incident, to which Del offers no response. As the convertible's roof retracts, Del smiles at her. He then cranks up rock music on the stereo and they drive away, leaving the town and its strangely cheerful residents behind. This is the end of the movie. Let me know what you think about this movie in the comments, and subscribe to the channel so as not to miss the release of new content. Thanks for watching.